We're going to be talking about developing enterprise bots with Office 365. There was a session yesterday that Rob Howard did that had a similar story to it, but we're going to kind of do it with a different take. So we're really excited to talk to you guys about that. This is a developer session. It's a 300 level session. If you're someone that's going to be scared by a little bit of code, then this may be an intimidating session for you. We are going to spend a decent amount of time writing some code, showing you how some things work behind the covers. But hopefully if you can just follow along, it'll still be something beneficial. If that totally turns you off, then there's still time probably to go and catch a different session. I don't want someone to be disappointed, but you have been warned from that aspect. Just a quick introduction of both Jeremy and I. My name is Richard DeZerga. I'm a principal engineer at Microsoft, and I'm really responsible for what we do with ISVs or software vendors worldwide around Office 365 integrations. And the past year, bots has been a very, very significant component of that. And Jeremy?
Jeremy Thake. I'm a VP of Product Technology at a company called Hyperfish, which you may have seen in the Expo Hall this week. Me and Rich used to do a podcast, which you're still running, the Office 365 Developer Podcast, when I actually worked at Microsoft in the Office 365 team. So big thanks for Rich letting me jump on stage to kind of cover this off. We wanted to start today with a quick demo of a scenario that's really very common in terms of what we're seeing bots being used for. And I think part of the session today from a show and tell is really to kind of explain the scenarios we see that are being successful in organizations and those that maybe aren't the best ones to kind of start with. And so that's really what we're kind of focusing on from kind of opening this up. What you'll see on the screen right now is Microsoft Teams, which you've seen a lot about this week. And there's this scenario where essentially the Bing Knowledge Graph has gone and identified that there's been this opportunity that's come up through this person, Julia, that's on the screen there. And that alert's come through inside of a Microsoft Team channel that has then been notified in their desktop notification or their web notification or even on their phone. Part of this is taking advantage of the buttons, and that's a big thing we're going to show today, is that although you'll see a lot about LUIS and bots and natural language processing, it actually makes a lot of sense here with buttons to make it very clear what you can do from this alert that's come up inside your conversations pane, inside your channel, inside this particular team for this deal.
So Jeremy, what we're seeing here, it's a notification, but this is actually a bot, right?
Right, and so it's communicating proactively back into the team that I'm a member of.
And that's a pretty common feature that we see these days, is that a lot of people think of as a bot as something that I have to go out and message. In this case, it's messaging me because some sort of transaction occurred or trigger happened behind the scenes. So pretty cool that it can do those proactive type things.
And I think the nice thing about this is that the bot inside your team is able to communicate with lots of different services. In this case, it was proactively triggered from the Bing graph. But if he goes there and clicks the Search for Office 365 button, essentially that's going to go and trigger off a search inside of everything I have in Office 365 related to Julia and that company. And you'll see here that not only do we get results back that we can go and view, but it's also showing the types of content that we have, whether it's conversations and chat I've had with her or someone in her company, notes or meetings that have happened in my calendar, but also we're using cognitive services to understand the sentiment across all that content as well. Now, we can go and check other sources without leaving Teams as well. So in this case, when Richard kind of clicks over there and does a search.
Yeah, just maybe to pause for a second too, is like, think about the value of this. Is like this, the original notification said that, hey, one of your big accounts has a new executive. And we were like, all right, well, let's see if we have any information on that executive. And because we can go and go against all these different data sources, and Office 365 has all that collaborative information for the organization, we found that executive. We found mention of her in other places, and we could even maybe connect with those account teams and make those connections, and maybe even be able to reach out and have a champion for our organization in that new executive. So I'll try that search LinkedIn, like you were saying, see if we can't find her on LinkedIn.
And so this is kind of highlighting, again, I'm not changing context. I'm not having to switch out of different applications to go and try and discover where she's in LinkedIn. And you'll see here that it's found that the few profiles there of Julia. And the nice thing is, again, without leaving this, I can use the LinkedIn API in the background to then connect into Julia. And so Rich has gone and found the correct one there because of the company name and the job title. And it's actually come back and said that it's now connected. We got the good old working on it coming up. Now, from this, it's then worked out based on the connections that Julia has inside of the organization that you've connected to on who we may also want to understand in terms of who her directs are, who our directs are in the team. And then if I want to schedule a meeting, what I can do very quickly is pick on who I want to meet with. So in this case, I could say, let's get the whole team in a room and have a conversation. Or maybe just my team, the directs that are reporting to me on this particular project. Or it can use the Microsoft Office graph to work out who the top collaborators are within inside of this Microsoft team and get those people in the room. So I don't have to even naturally think too hard about, okay, I just want the people that have been working on this in the last few weeks to jump in the room. And so when, Rich, if you just want to kind of click there.
Yeah, actually, the cool thing is that the bot has actually delivered us two kind of actions at once. And this is pretty, I think it doesn't highlight it all that great, but it actually says that it created a lead in Dynamics for me. So Dynamics is another, one of those products that we can reach into and manipulate. And so it automatically created a lead. And what I'll do is I'm going to view that lead. And instead of jumping out and leaving Teams and going to something like Dynamics to view it, Tact happens to actually deliver a really cool experience inside of Teams where I click on View Lead, and I get all that information aggregated together in a custom tab. Now, this is pretty unique, Jeremy. I mean, when we talk about today enterprise clients and channels where we can experience bots, some of them are going to have some really advanced features like this where we can extend a bot to have more of a user interface, and that's kind of what we've done here.
Yeah, you see a lot of the bot demos where it's conversations and a lot of typing, and I think this demo does a great job of kind of highlighting that you're using a lot of the features, the extensibility hooks that Teams has, and the bot's able to integrate with it because of the context links it can do. So in this instance, we've got one pin page there that Tact's loading up to show that lead. But we see a lot of customers out there in the wild kind of having lots of different pages there to lots of different applications in the enterprise so that when that team's working, they're not having to leave Teams to do it. And the bot can actually kind of flick over to those tabs really quickly. In this case, you can see even pop up a dialogue to give more context on that lead.
So I'll go back to conversations, and you were wanting me to search top collaborators?
That's right, yeah. So
Yeah, and top collaborators, if you kind of took the developer side of this, it's actually leveraging the people API inside of the Microsoft Graph, which is, it has intelligence into it to know, I can send in a topic like, in this case, ProSwear is a company. I could search that as a topic. It can actually give me people related to that topic. And so in this case, it looks like it found Lily and Trisha.
And so then from here, the nice part about it is that we can actually action things on the Microsoft Graph again. So in this case, there's a few options that we can flick through. And in this case, Richard can make that decision on what kind of suits him best, or maybe he can have a conversation with those people in Teams to work out what the right time is. And as soon as we click schedule it on this link, that in the background is calling off and actually making that connection to create that calendar entry. So in real time, you've seen them in the top right there. This actually created that calendar invite with those attendees, with all the context of what that meeting should be about based on the activity that's happened in that Microsoft Teams chat channel. So it's a really nice end-to-end business process that is very common in an organization to do around a particular client from a sales perspective, but there's some really clever ways that you could use that in your own enterprises, kind of map that kind of flow end-to-end. So I guess the reason we did this was we really wanted to highlight that there's lots of different ways bots can be used, and there's a lot of hype around bots. And so I found this out there on this net as just a good explanation here, if you look, of all the different products, software, frameworks, SDKs. And I'm sure if you guys have done any bot development, you've probably seen some of this in the past, or you're even using it right now. This is going to keep on growing. This isn't going away, but I feel like we're going to be on a bit of a journey of learning from our own mistakes, but also I'd recommend learning from other people's mistakes And there's some great resources out there, which I'll share at the end of this session, of what has worked and what hasn't worked for some very large enterprise customers as well. But this just kind of indicate this landscape is extremely large. Microsoft are extremely invested in this as well. And there's been some great sessions this week kind of covering off some of the fundamentals here, and we're going to kind of try and tie it all together. And so just to highlight some numbers here, this was shared in a session earlier this week and highlights the Microsoft Bot Framework numbers. So this is just one framework that's being used out there in the industry, which allows you to publish to multiple channels and has a really nice way of writing cards in almost a generic way that means it'll work across the different platforms, which Richard will talk about later. But some of those numbers are incredible. Like, we've definitely got past the Fart Bot app now, when you've got that many, 1 million users per day going in and using a bot. So this isn't something that is super early now. This is something that's definitely being adopted, and I think that Microsoft Teams kind of being in general availability now in Office 365 has really started to make it super easy to kind of deploy these things and get them going out there in the wild. And then just as another example, there was a research study done in the banking and healthcare sectors, which talked about some of the usages of bots already out there and some predictions they're making all the way through to 2020 based on some of the savings they're seeing. They've seen from call center perspectives with banking apps, and sometimes we're not all that happy with talking with human beings, that sometimes it can be way more effective to talk to a bot that understands the flow a bit easier. And so there has been use cases here where there's almost 4 minutes of savings per call closing out an inquiry that's coming from a customer, which can lead up to, in this case with the research, up to a nearly 70-cent savings per call. Now, over time, that can be almost an $8 billion cost saving, which they're estimating for that particular industry by 2020. So there's lots of savings by making it more effective to get your work done, by introducing bots into an environment that understands how a business flow is currently being done dealing with a human being and replacing it with a more automated process that users are familiar with. Because every time I pick up the phone and speak to a human, I'm picking up the phone and speaking to a different human. Whereas with a bot, people get familiar with speed dialing through and speed typing through the flows to get things done quicker. Now, there are a lot of bots out there. And some of what we want to kind of highlight here is that what we typically see enterprises doing right now is almost this optimizer. They're taking an existing web application or an existing mobile app, and they're trying to replace some of that functionality by bots. And typically that lives side by side with what's already existing. That's the most common one. It's an easy one to do for an enterprise because typically that web application or mobile app has budget, and they have a developer team already, and they're iterating in sprints, building out or introducing new features into those web apps and mobile apps. But in this instance, it means that they can go, okay, for this next sprint, let's try and introduce a Microsoft Teams bot or a Skype for Business bot into the equation. What we also see is, rather than kind of extending that, is when a conversation comes up and says, hey, we need a business form or we need this particular business process replaced, is alternatively to building a web app or a mobile app, you might just decide, okay, we're going to do this project as a bot. And so that kind of bot will be what we've called the one-trick pony. This was actually sourced by someone inside Microsoft who kind of categorized all these things. But the idea here is that it's like a mini utility. So it's something very simple that can be deployed to everybody inside of Microsoft Teams that gets one very simple job done. And often it's using cognitive services to do something smart in the back end. So you saw in the demo there the scheduling using the Microsoft Graph, picking all the attendees and working out what time is available. If there's a common business process like that, that's where we kind of see that kind of functionality being deployed as a bot. The proactive bot essentially is what we showed at the beginning, where it was the Bing graph actually notifying and dropping something into the team and letting those users know that there's an activity that's being done. Often it's around your own personal productivity or a team's productivity. And that's where it kind of splits between the social bot, which is more about accomplishing tasks as a group. So with Microsoft team members all in one channel, that bot in particular posted about that account, that sales account activity, and that allowed everybody in that team to communicate with that bot. So although in this demo with Richard, we only showed one user going through that flow, if we were both in there, we could have both been having a conversation with that TAC bot as a group of people socially rather than as an individual. And we see that kind of real differentiator there when we're focusing on business flows between the proactive and the social. We've already talked about the shield, shielding people from human beings and allowing them to talk to an automated bot. And so that's another great persona there as well. And what's interesting is, even in the enterprise world, this is relevant, but this is more common in the consumer space, especially in marketing, which is this chatty bot, which engages with users kind of randomly over time, just to keep them engaged, keep them aware of what's going on. If you're interested in these, one really popular one was the Game of Thrones bot, which allowed you during the episode's live streaming to engage back with you and let you know who those characters were and what their backgrounds were, and being able to respond to them. Imagine being able to do that in real time at a boardroom meeting where people could post things in there and the bot could then kind of add additional information and insight as those conversations are happening in large environments. And then the super bot, as we like to categorize, is the one that kind of tackles a bunch of those different scenarios and tries to build it into one bot. But as you'll see, as we go through this, you'll see that we're giving some advice here of not being too kind of overwhelming and trying to throw the entire kitchen sink into one bot. And that will become very clear by the time we get to the end of the session.
All right, so getting into some of the technical parts of this, since this is a Microsoft conference, we're going to kind of err on the side of the bot framework, which for the enterprise clients that we think enterprise users are using is already connected to all of those. So we're going to assume that you have some level of knowledge of what the bot framework is, but I do have just a quick slide that talks about it. First of all, it is a cloud-based abstraction layer for popular clients or channels, to where if I want to build a bot. I say cloud-based, that's a pretty important concept. I know that at Ignite, we have a lot of customers that come here that have a lot of on-premises infrastructure. And so you have to understand that when you're building a bot in the bot framework, every message is going to go through the cloud. It's going to proxy through there regardless of where the server infrastructure is or where your clients are sitting. But it adds a lot of transparency to building a bot. You don't have to write things that are like Slack specific or Teams specific or Skype for Business specific. It wraps all of that as like an abstraction layer. So if some support rich cards for choices and some don't, it can automatically adjust that for you. It includes SDKs for both Node and C#. So if you were at Rob Howard's session, he did a bunch of things with C#. We're going to do some things with Node today to quickly build bots. And it's pretty consistent between the two if you try doing different things. And like I said, it does support a number of enterprise channels that we're going to go into, and it's secured by Azure Active Directory. So this is a schematic of what the bot framework looks like. Really what I want to highlight is this. Basically, if you're building a bot, it's a web service. You're going to build a web API, whether that's, again, using .NET, Node, or really you can use any programming language you want. Just know that we don't have SDKs for things outside of Node and C#. Doesn't mean you can't build on Python or something else, but just know you'll probably end up doing extra work there. But backing up, what you basically have is a web service that goes through the bot framework's connector service, which is kind of in the top middle of the screen. That allows you then to connect into all of these different clients. So there's a number of clients. I think there's 16 maybe that the bot framework supports. Inside of that, you can connect in a number of different cognitive services. So Rob Howard talked a lot about LUIS for natural language. We're not going to cover LUIS quite as much today. Rob did a really good job yesterday if you want to go back and watch that session. But that's obviously a pretty natural thing to incorporate into a bot is natural language processing. But essentially, what we're talking about is building this web service. You can host it anywhere. We offer an Azure service that can host that very easily, but you can just as easily host that pretty much anywhere where web hosting is available and on the internet. I do want to talk about on-premises because, again, at Ignite, we tend to have a lot more of enterprise devs that might have to deal with on-premises infrastructure. Know that the bot framework, again, it is a cloud-based service. That being said, you can build custom channels if you're wanting to connect to your own, maybe you have a custom messaging service that's in your enterprise, you can build channels for the bot framework using something called direct line. So that is something that's a capability of the bot framework, is this custom ability to use direct line. If you don't want any activity going through the cloud, we don't have any immediate plans of making the bot framework available on premises, but there is something, one of my colleagues built a direct line host that you could run on premises. So I put a link to that GitHub repo. I would just say that it's very, I would say, experimental, but if it's something that has been a non-starter for you in building bots in your organization, it's certainly worth investigating, the ability to proxy all of that on your own servers. So let's get into specifically bots with Office 365. That's what this session is about, is enterprise bots with Office 365. And I'm going to break this down into two areas. I want to talk about the clients, what I would consider an enterprise client, and then I want to break down the data. So Office 365 has lots of great data, and I want to kind of look at how we can leverage both of those. So first, let's talk about what we would consider an enterprise client that we're going to be able to support with the bot framework. The first is, I'm going to say Microsoft Teams. That is really Microsoft's premier experience. Lots of announcements this week around that being the future of our communication platform at Microsoft. Some of the pros of Microsoft Teams are the ability to have very rich cards and controls. There's all these great extensions. You saw how I can easily jump out to a tab if my bot needs more of a user interface. It's very natural to do inside of Teams. There are some cons of Teams right now. Probably the biggest one is if I want to use a bot in Teams, I actually have to @mention the bot every time. I can't have a bot that's just monitoring activity inside of Teams. In fact, if the bot messages me, it won't even get my response unless I mention it back. So that's a little bit of a kludgy thing right now in Teams. There's a specific reason we're doing it that way from a security standpoint. We don't want to expose data that someone didn't intend to expose to a third party. The other one is there's some differences between a one-on-one chat and a team chat. A good example is, Jeremy works for Hyperfish. They do really great things around enhancing profiles. One of the best things I think you guys have done a lot with is really trying to promote organizations to get profile pictures. So if Jeremy wanted to build a bot at Hyperfish that allowed me to go and maybe upload a new profile photo, Teams would be a very awkward client for that. And the reason is a one-on-one chat with a bot doesn't allow you to send an attachment. The team chat does. If I'm in a team channel with a bot, I can send attachments, but one-on-one doesn't. So that's a bit of a, I would say, limitation for Teams. The second one is Skype for Business. The pro side of this is, first of all, it's a very popular client. Probably has more penetration today in the enterprise than Teams does because Teams is so new. We do have bot framework support for Skype for Business. In fact, we announced this week we're supporting what we call a hybrid approach for bots with the bot framework, which is if you have Skype for Business set up with Azure Active Directory for your identity provider, you can actually use the bot framework on premises with Skype for Business Server. Some of the cons are there's a big, kind of a questionable future. I will tell you this, we're not doing additional investment in the bot framework channel for Skype for Business. It's kind of what you get today is what you can expect in the future. And I would say what you get today isn't all that great. You get very just plain text and hyperlinks. You don't get any sort of rich cards, buttons, controls. So it is somewhat limited in what you get there. The third I'll mention is Slack. I would say of all the clients for the enterprise, Slack certainly is the most mature. It's been out there, well, maybe not more mature than Skype for Business, but it is a very mature platform, and it has a very mature bot platform. They've had bots for a long, long time in Slack, and therefore it is a mature bot platform for delivering things in. It's also had pretty gigantic growth, so you certainly see that there. From a con standpoint, it's probably the same cons you hear when we compare Teams to Slack. It's data sovereignty, things like that.
And then the fourth one here is email, which, believe it or not, people were quite surprised sometimes when we mention that as a bot. It's something at Hyperfish that we use right now where you can actually have it interact with the individual in the inbox. And let's face it, all of us kind of use email. It's been around for a long, long time. And it's something that you can easily a user can get used to and understand very, very quickly. It doesn't feel like a bot sometimes. So we have learned at Hyperfish that when we do send an email, and even in the email where we state you can reply to this email, because they realize that it's a bot and it's not an individual, often they don't understand, even with the instructions to say that you can reply, they're still not comfortable with it. So there is that learning curve of knowing that, because I'm not in a chat interface, but I'm in my Outlook inbox, that I can have that conversation over email on that side. And then the cons aspect of that is that sometimes there's this high latency of kind of waiting for the inbox to refresh, so it's not as real time as me being in Skype, Microsoft Teams. And unfortunately, often it can feel like spam. If you actually call your bot a bot, and it comes through into your email inbox, some users will immediately kind of add that to the junk. So we've learned a lot at Hyperfish with like kind of trying to use the email from that perspective. And so you do have to definitely train your users to expect that to come into the inbox and be very wary of what you call it and what email address it comes on under.
And the last one is the custom embed. This is another one that we find is very popular. The idea behind this is I have maybe my own custom client. Maybe it's a mobile application, or maybe it's a web application that I want to embed a bot into. And that is maybe one of the most popular ones I've seen in the last few years. The benefit here is you can tailor every part of it. It can be the exact kind of experience that you want to deliver for that application. You have full control over the client at that point.
Yeah, I think there's this notion with things like a lot of consumer web applications now where you start seeing the chat window in the bottom right. And as a technical person, I was always like, let's see if I can break this bot when I start chatting to it, which a normal user wouldn't do. But I think if I take my technical kind of challenging hat off of trying to break the bot and think about the functionality, I actually canceled my cable total contract and I've gone completely wireless now. Just by doing a chat conversation with this cable company. So I didn't have to go deal with any human individuals, didn't have to try and get sold a different package and so forth. It allowed me to get the job done very, very quickly. So there's scenarios in the consumer world which people will start getting familiar with from a chatbot perspective, embedded into those web applications, that I think will allow you to do the same thing in the enterprise world where they'll start to feel a lot more comfortable with it in the next kind of few years.
Yeah, and to me, the one con here is that you're responsible for not only building the bot, but also the client that it runs in most cases. So it's a little bit more development, but we'll actually build one today. We're going to do an embedded bot as one of our demos. I'll point this out here really quickly. Since Teams is really our premier bot experience, one of the biggest, because I have to mention the bot in my team channels, that makes it really awkward when I do natural language on it, because you'll have, the way it comes over is this weird @mention markup in the message text. And so we do have some guidance on how you can strip out those mentions. So this is just a little code sample. I'm not going to run this, but if you're building a bot that's going to run in Teams, you do need to have maybe some additional logic that says, hey, if the client is Teams, I need to strip out that @mention at the beginning because it's kind of useless. It's just the mention of that bot. That being said, I do want to go a little bit deeper in embedding custom bots. That's kind of the other, it's pretty easy if you've used the bot framework before to turn on a channel for a bot. We'll look at that here in a little bit when we do one of our demos. But I wanted to kind of cover the custom aspect of this. So the bot framework offers a web chat control. It's open sourced, it's customizable, and you can embed it into apps, including not just web applications. I say it's a web control, but you can embed that web control into mobile applications, whether that's you're building something native, you're using Xamarin in like a web browser control, or Cordova. Obviously, it would fit easily into a Cordova type of mobile application. But the fact that it's a web chat control makes it very easy to embed different places. It has something really cool called the back channel that is very powerful. What it is it's basically a hidden communication tunnel between your bot and the user that's using the bot. And we can use that to pass all kinds of cool information. And I have a really good diagram of this here in a moment. So that back channel can be used to provide additional context and identity. And that's what we're going to do today We're actually going to do it inside of SharePoint. So here's a little diagram of what this is. So we're going to do it in SharePoint today. And so I have a SharePoint page, first of all. And obviously, on a SharePoint page, you have a bunch of web parts. Now, I could easily just slap that web control inside a web part. So you can see I have my little web control here. And when someone chats with this web chat control, it's going to go out to our bot application. So you see this message here. And our bot application is going to start kind of doing its thing. So here it's going to just kind of crank away, and it's going to say, you know what? I don't have all the information I need. I need some additional information. And so what it can do is it can actually call over back to SharePoint through that back channel. It can say, you know what? I need some SharePoint stuff. And so it's going to go and invoke that across the back channel. Now, the cool thing about embedding this in a SharePoint page is you can run SharePoint REST calls locally on a SharePoint page. So ultimately, our chat control here, it could go call into SharePoint. It could say, hey, go get me some things in SharePoint. I could go get the user profile. I could go get lists. I could go really do anything that the user has access to because it would run script as the user. So I could do that and then return that data back to my bot, and ultimately my bot then could respond. And so that's what we're going to do today is we're going to build that process out of building a custom web part. We're also going to build the bot that connects into it to demonstrate that client experience that we can have with bots. All right. Okay, so we have a number of quick start projects out on GitHub, both for .NET and Node. So if you're interested in building bots that connect to Office 365, you can just clone it. And probably the best thing, I'll zoom in here just really quickly. If you're interested in this, just capture my GitHub account. It's Rich Diz with 2 Z's. They're all in my GitHub repository. And we have them both. It'll be like Microsoft GraphBot Quick Start. There's one for Node, one for C#. We have a couple for Lewis as well. So there's like 5 different quick starts. I'm going to use this as my starter for my bot. It's very basic. There's not a whole lot going on here, but it's going to be kind of my starter project. So we'll go ahead and I'm going to grab this, and I'm going to clone this into a new project. And I'll zoom in here. Let's do a git clone. And I'm going to clone it. We'll call this the Ignite. I'm going to create a new project with this. So we'll call this the Ignite 2017 bot. And we'll change directories to it. And the last thing I'm going to do is, because this came from GitHub, I'm going to remove the Git references. So I'm just going to do a rm remove.git. That way, it's not going to be kind of associated with that original Git repository. So now what I'm going to do is, let's go ahead and, now that I've kind of created this, I'll open it up in Visual Studio Code. And essentially, this bot needs to be published to the bot framework so that I can communicate with it. And so what I'm going to do, this already has some environment variables that were here left over, but I need to basically give it my bot ID and secret. And the way I get that is going through the bot framework portal. So I just go to bots or dev.botframework.com. This is free. It's a free service. You don't have to pay for this. And I'm going to create a new bot. So I'm going to create a bot. I'm going to do kind of all the registration myself. And we'll just call this the Ignite 2017 SharePoint bot. I give it a handle, a description. Now here's something that's really important is, what is my messaging endpoint? Remember I said that a bot is just a web API. Well, this project is already set up with a web API when I provisioned it. So just to show this to you, if I were to go under source, server, server.ts, if you're not a Node person, don't worry. I'll kind of explain this to you. I'm basically setting up this underscore API or /API/messages. That's the endpoint that I want all my messages to communicate on. So that's what I need to put into here. But the domain I need is kind of interesting. In this case, I need the bot framework that's running out in the cloud to be able to contact my machine here. Well, I don't have a public IP address or anything, so I'm going to use a special service called ngrok. There's a lot of these that exist out on the internet for developers. It's basically a proxying service, so you can get your computer behind a firewall, internet accessible. So I'm going to go ahead, and I've already set up my ngrok endpoint, and that's what I'm going to put in here. I'm going to say HTTPS. I think I did ignite.ngrok.io, and then /API/messages. So that's my messaging endpoint. The next thing I need to do is generate an ID and secret for my bot, and that's handled by Azure Active Directory. So I'm going to click on this Create Microsoft App ID and Password. It's going to already pull over my app name, so all I really have to do is copy down my ID, and I'm going to put it back in here in my environment variables. So there's my app ID, and then I'm going to generate a password. There's my password. Now you need to make sure you copy down your password if you haven't built things with Azure Active Directory applications. You only get to see this once. You can generate a new one, but you can never bring this back up. Okay, so we have our bot, and I'm just going to register it now. Okay, the bot is good to go. So I'm going to come over here, and this bot is very basic, but what I want to do is set this up to listen on the back channel. And to do that, I'm going to create a new dialog. So we have some dialogues here to the side. You can see I have a root dialog. I'm going to create a new dialog that I'm going to call the, let's see what I wanted to name this. We're going to call this the back channel dialog. Okay, so we have this back channel dialog. And what I'm going to do is, just for the sake of time, I am going to use a code snippet here. And I'll just explain a little bit about what's going on here. So I am basically setting up a listener that's going to listen for events. And I'll show you where this is wired up. But when an event comes in, I'm going to look at the event name, and then I'm going to respond to it. Now, one of the things that I can see I did here is I haven't actually done an npm install for this. So let me do that here really quickly. So this is just pulling in all the different packages. This project is going to use, it uses that bot builder SDK, so you can see that's what it was kind of complaining about, that I didn't have that pulled into my project yet. In Server TS, this is where I set up all my listeners, and I'm going to actually set up my listener for events. And so what I'll do is go ahead and put in my back channel dialog. And down here at the bottom, I already have one dialog set up, which is my root dialog. You can see that here. I'm saying, hey, when just a normal message comes in, send it to that root dialog. I'm going to set up my back channel dialog now. So we'll say BC dialog. And I need to pass in here my the bot builder stuff that's already set up. So this project, again, you don't have to set up the bot builder stuff. It's already done by default up here at the top. You can see here's where that bot builder universal bot is set up. So it's already there for me. I am going to undo a few things here. I don't need the HTTPS stuff that it has because I'm using ngrok. All right, so I'm going to pass in that bot, and then I'm going to tell it bot on, and when it's an event, I want to pass it off to my BC dialog.listener. And that's basically how I say when an event comes in, which is what the back channel uses, is that event, I want to pass it off to that listener. And if we were to look back at that listener, it's just looking at the name of the event, because I could send 50 different types of events. I could say this is an initialize, this is a query result, all these different types, and I can process those differently. All right, so this is actually done for now. I can go ahead and run this with ngrok. So what I'm going to do, here's where ngrok kind of comes into play. It's already installed on my machine, so it's just something that you download, and then I can just say ngrok, and I'm going to use the HTTP protocol, I have a custom subdomain that is Ignite, and I'm going to listen on port 3980. So we'll go ahead and run that. And it looks like it's connected and happy. I could actually test this here really quickly. There is a bot framework emulator that I can use to test these things out. So I already have it in here in Grok Messages. I need to put in my new ID and password. Oh, I don't have my ngrok settings, but if I were to go back to ngrok, you can see that I'm getting these forbiddens. This won't affect us later. It's the emulator's not set up to work with ngrok, but you can see actually messages have already come through. It was a conversation created message that came through. It's another type of message, but we should be up and running and should be good. So that's the bot side of this. Let's actually do the SharePoint framework side of this. So one of the other things that I did prior to this session is I did provision a SharePoint framework web part. And so let me go ahead and open that guy up. So I've just provisioned this ahead of time. I just used the normal Yeoman generator. This is actually the first time I've opened this project. There's no like magic up my sleeves. It's basically just a bare bones SharePoint framework project. What I do want to do is bring in a couple of additional packages. So I'm going to go to my package.json, and under dependencies, I'm going to add 2 additional dependencies. One of these is for the bot framework.
Typo in there. Body.
Web chat. What's that? Oh, thanks. That's why I didn't find it. And I'm actually going to bring in a specific version of the web chat. I haven't tested which specific one works and doesn't, but I know that the most recent version has some conflicts with the React that its React kind of conflicts with the SharePoint framework. So I know that 0.7.1 does work, so that's what I'm going to use for now. The other thing that I'm going to bring in is something called direct line. So I'm going to, again, say bot framework, direct line JS, and in this case, I'll just take the most recent, which is, there we go. And let me just install this here real quick. So these are 2 packages that are, one is that web chat control that I'm going to be able to just place into my SharePoint framework web part. And then the direct line is how I'm going to actually set up a secure communication between my bot and that web chat control. In fact, while it's doing this, one of the things that will help me kind of get ahead is I can actually get a direct line key because I'm going to need that. So here I am inside of my bot. I could go and activate all these different channels if I wanted to make this work in Teams or Skype or Slack. But what I'm going to do is this special one, which is direct line. And I need a direct line key, so I'm just going to show this here. And that's basically my password that's going to be used behind the scenes. So let's see if it's done. OK, it's done. And so now I can kind of continue on. So inside of my SharePoint framework project, it already has a little web part here, including some styles. I'm going to rip out all these styles because I just need one really simple one, which is maybe the root. So let's just kind of remove all this. And so we're going to do SharePoint bot. And this is a little bit weird, but the bot, the web chat control, it wants to take up the full vertical amount that it has available. But the SharePoint framework web parts, they don't work well with kind of that dynamic height. So I'm going to set a kind of arbitrary height, min height here. So we're just going to do a div. How many do I need here? One more. And I'm going to say position relative. And we're going to do a min height of maybe 400 pixels. So that's going to mean that we'll get at least 400 pixels in my web part. I'll go to the TypeScript here. We do need to add a couple of imports. So I'm going to import that direct line. We'll just do it right here under this other import. So we'll do an import of direct line, and this one is going to be from, what is it called, the bot framework. We'll do one more. I think I have this one. This should be direct line. Okay, and then actually the web chat control has its own style, so I'm going to do something a little bit weird here, which is pull in a style class. Now what I'm going to do is, just because that's taken a little bit of time to type in, I'm just going to grab these here that I know I have that already work. I do have an app in the oven, as you would say, in case this one doesn't work out. So we'll go ahead and do that. And then finally, what I'm going to do is update my DOM. So this is the DOM that's going to be injected by the bot framework, and I'm going to go ahead and update this guy to do a few extra things. So let's go, again, I'll just grab what I already have, speed things up. So I'm really doing it pretty simple here. So I'm just having a single div, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell the web chat control to take over that div, and you'll see that here in just a moment. The other thing is I need to make sure my class here is right. It should be SharePoint bot, so we'll just put that in here. All right, so the first thing that I need to do to get this working is I need to pull in, I'm going to get the user profile. So I'm going to say ignite, I'm going to use this ignite2 thing, and all this is doing is calling out to the user profiles to see who the user is. Because I want to tell my bot, I want to pass it an identity. I'm going to say, here's who's running the application. So this is just a simple, again, because I'm running in a SharePoint page, I can easily run scripts, and I'm saying, hey, go use the people manager and get my properties. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my connection to DirectLine and inject the web chat control into my DOM. And that's what you can see here. I'm saying get element by ID, which if you look here is the ID of my div. So I'm basically saying find that div and go and throw the web chat control into it. Now you can see I do need to put my DirectLine key. So let's go over here and grab it. Okay, and then finally, let's see. Oh, no, I think we're good. Oh, I know what I need to do. I'm just going to copy it from this other one. So the last thing we need to do is actually listen, or actually send the back channel event, which I'm doing right here. And I'll explain this here in our project. So if you look what I'm doing here, I'm getting the bot connection. I'm posting an activity of type event. I'll zoom in on this. So I'm passing an event that I'm calling initialize, and I'm passing some data. I'm passing who the user is. And then when that's successful, I'll do this success initializing is complete. So let's run this here really quickly and make sure everything's looking good. So we have ngrok running. We will go ahead and do a gulp serve on this. So it's going to bring up the SharePoint Workbench. Now, my web part's not going to work here because when you're using the local SharePoint Workbench, you can't call those REST APIs. So what I'm going to do is, the cool thing is you can just convert the Workbench to the one that's actually in your tenant. So I'm going to go and I have it saved here. I'm going to go to SharePoint Workbench. Now, when I insert it, I should go down here and find where is it? see EchoBot, which is my backup one. All right, well, we're going to jump over to the EchoBot one since that one seems to not be happy. Not sure why it's not showing it, so we'll exit out of here. Luckily, I have the backup one. Well, actually, my other one should be fine. Sorry, too many windows. Not sure which one it is here. Maybe that's already running. Maybe this will just be happy with me if I run it here. Let's see. So our web chat came up. Let's see if we're actually getting any activity on it. I'm not sure which one this is trying to communicate with. So we may not get it on the back channel. Oh, no. Boo. Demo God's not happy. I'm not sure why my web part didn't show up. I'll tell you what, why don't we go, I want to jump forward to, let's do that. Let's jump forward to here, and then we'll jump back. Is that cool?
Sure. Yeah. So while Rich is kicking the tires on the SharePoint web parts, we'll jump a bit forward. And so some of the things that you would have seen in that demo that Richard was building there was this notion of authentication. Some of the big things that you'd have to take into consideration from the enterprise perspective is that you're going to be dealing with identities. So in the case where you've got it embedded inside of SharePoint as a web chat, you noticed in Richard's code there, he had the call out to the SharePoint user profiles in the simplest form just to go and get that person's name. The authentication there was all handled because in the SharePoint web part, essentially I have the ability to call into those user profiles and use the context of the user in that page. And the bot can do that on the back channel as well by passing through the tokens to handle the trust to go back in and call SharePoint to do other things other than just checking for that person's name. Now, some of the things to take into consideration is that when you're in Teams and you're trying to authenticate into other services outside of the Microsoft Sphere that are on Azure AD, is you have to handle how you're jumping out into other APIs and handling that authentication within that embedded chat. And that's one of the things in the enterprise which is going to be quite common. And that's why we're seeing a lot of organizations wrapping a lot of enterprise services and systems into Azure AD so that it makes it easier because you've already got that context of the user logged into SharePoint or the user logged into Microsoft Teams. So just definitely take that into consideration. There's a bunch of guidance out there on how to handle that. Rich has already mentioned about the on-premises considerations there, especially now that we have that support with Skype for Business on that aspect. You can use those different direct line connectors to connect through to your on-premises services if you are trying to talk to systems that are running inside your own data centers, whether they're on-premises physically or whether they're in private data centers in the cloud. And then the other big thing that I'll tackle in the next slide, but just as a bullet point here, is that the overuse of natural language processing is really tough. And if I just skip through to this anti-pattern, this slide is actually from a session that Matt Veloso did at Build this year in 2007, and I'll have the links at the bottom for this. And it kind of just really highlights this notion that the super bot, where as a user, when I come to a bot, I kind of have to guess in the case where it does lots and lots and lots of things, what I can ask it. Rather than kind of guiding the user through the experience with maybe a series of buttons like you saw in a demo right at the beginning of the session. So from an enterprise side, it's hard because you're going to have a different selection of generations of users within your enterprise. You're going to have people that have been in the industry for a long, long time that didn't kind of grow up using things like Snapchat, Facebook Messenger, WeChat, and WhatsApp, and all those things where they might be familiar with bots when they come into the industry where you work. And so putting a blank blinking cursor inside of Microsoft Teams is not going to be intuitive, maybe not even for the kind of the millennials and the younger that are coming in, but also the people who have been in your business for a long time. So the demo we showed at the beginning with the buttons makes it a lot easier to understand what options there are. And this is not dissimilar to what you do with your applications right now in the web or in the mobile. You'll have a top navigation, and this is all the things I can do in my web application. So don't feel just because you see a conversation window with a bot that you have to immediately go to natural language and just assume that I can talk to it just like I talk to Cortana or Siri or Alexa, where again, even in those scenarios with voice, you start to kind of guess what the things are that are available, and sometimes you don't get those voice commands correct. So make it easy for your users in the enterprise to start using these bots rather than using mobile and web to get things going. And that's kind of something we've seen people trip up on because it's typically a developer that drives one of these new projects in your business that is maybe saying, look, let's do this as a bot rather than how we've done things in the past as a web and a mobile, and not to kind of go big bang and build a super bot, and think really about the flows through your bot and how they could be done as a menuing system with buttons rather than using too much Lewis right to start. And you'll find you'll get a lot better success that way as well. And then the other aspect of it to take into consideration is the versioning. The demos Richard has gone through today, kind of on a local machine and releasing those into source control and having different versions of the API that you hook up to. Try and get into a process in your own teams of how you're going to handle multiple developers working on this bot, where you're going to host these things, maybe in Microsoft Teams, and have version channels where the bots are hosted, and be very, very clear with the bot names. Internally at Hyperfish, we kind of got tripped up on that at first, and once we had a kind of good methodology of, okay, this is the dev, and this is my staging, and these are my prods, and this is how we're doing the releases and the branches within our source control, and how we're doing the deployments into the different channels within our teams, it made it a lot easier to understand how we were doing the versioning and in a more consolidated way. And then there is an essence of discoverability here as well. It's definitely getting better in things like Microsoft Teams and Skype for Business and Skype from a Microsoft perspective with bots. And also with what we've seen, I explained earlier with email, it's very discoverable because it goes straight into the user's inbox. But there is a little bit of education in terms of making those things deployed directly into a Microsoft Teams and embedding those into templates, which eventually the Microsoft Teams guys will get to. And so try and work with your developer teams on how you're going to deploy these things so that they are discoverable a lot easier, so that people even know, for instance, that the TAC bot is there inside the Microsoft team, rather than assuming that someone's going to be able to just go @mention and realize they can type in TAC and ask these questions. What we found with some of our customers that are using the Hyperbot is that just doing some kind of training with your users to show them this value, whether it's a very short video that you throw up on Microsoft Stream or something you share via a PowerPoint presentation, or kind of go around in person and showing them. And then people start to get used to and familiar with these bots. And over time, as you introduce more bots, people will jump in and find that a lot easier and to make that discoverable. And so that's kind of something that we've definitely seen on that aspect. And you look like you're hot, so let's flick back.
It helps if you save your environment variables. That's what I didn't do. So I had no bot ID or secret. But we'll run this here really quickly just to kind of give you an idea. Actually, I think I have it running. Let me just make sure. Yep. So I'll go back to the SharePoint workspace. And in this case, what I've done, I'll make a quick modification to my SharePoint, or actually my node process, is right now, for initialize, I've already kind of fast forwarded, but what I'll do is, let me change the message.text. So we'll just change this for a second, message.text. We'll say, hello, Ignite. I know your name is, and we'll add to this the event.value. I think it's just event.value. We'll try that, and then we'll send it. So let's here run this really quickly. So again, when the web part gets added to the page, it's going to send this initialize event. That's happening again right here. We're going and sending it as an initialize. Actually, it looks like it's going to be, yeah, that should be right, dot value. So let's check it out. Let's go back to our page. We'll insert our web part. Give it 1 second, and there it goes. It says, hello, Ignite. I know your name is Richard Azariga. So our bot knows its name, and the back end knows the name, like the actual bot web service. And so you can take this a little bit further. I'll just do a quick modification here of 2 things. One is I'm going to modify this to don't just welcome the user. I'm going to actually send it another private event. I'm going to say, okay, you've initialized. I know who you are. Go run a query for me. Go get me how many lists are in SharePoint. So it's actually saying, go run this web/lists. And then I'm listening for the query results. So I added another listener for the query results that I'm actually going to save into session state so that I don't have to re-query this every time. If they message me again, I already know how many SharePoint items they have. In my SharePoint web parts, let me just rerun that. If I go to my SharePoint web part, I'm going to add 1 additional piece of code here. I'm already listening I'm already sending initialize, but I need to listen on the back channel. I'm not listening on the back channel yet, so I'm going to add 1 last snippet here where I'm saying I'm listening for bot activity that is of type event and that is saying run a SharePoint query. And if that comes in, go run it, get the results, and then send it again. So the same thing you saw me before, doing a bot connection post activity. I'm sending my query results using bot connection.post activity. All of this is a capability of both Node and C#. I'm just doing Node because I noticed that Rob was going to do C# yesterday. So let's go ahead and save this. It should automatically pick up my changes. Looks like everything's good here. Let's go back to our workspace and we'll re-add the web part. Go ahead and add the Echo bot. So give it 1 second. It has to initialize, but it's going to say, I don't do much, but I already know that you have 39 lists in SharePoint. So now we've built an embedded bot that can run anything it needs to against SharePoint and have that data on the back end by being able to be local on the page using the SharePoint framework. Cool.
So you mentioned before, Richard, that the authentication with SharePoint, which is passing it through, but there are some things that right now the bot framework doesn't do from that scenario, right? So what kind of things do people have to look out for from that aspect?
Yeah, really good. So you notice on this slide, and I'll try to, I don't know if this Zoom works, but if you look here on Teams, you can see it has my picture down at the bottom left. And so one of the weird things is, even though I'm signed into Teams, we'll kind of, as a bot developer or someone that builds a bot inside of Teams, we'll kind of tell you who that person is, but you don't get any tokens to get data. You can't go and say, oh, well, give me their files or go give me this. Because the main reason for that is we haven't built into Teams or really any of the clients for the enterprise a consent flow. So that's what's lacking is there's no way to consent to be able to get access tokens and give you access to different things. So it's kind of a suboptimal experience. What you actually have to do is, and you see it here, is you have to prompt them to sign in. It's a little bit of a weird thing because you're like, hey, wait, I'm already signed in to Teams. Why do I have to sign in again? And that's, again, it's a limitation. We have people working really hard to come up with a solution for it. But today, it's kind of the facts of life. So enter the bot auth. BotAuth is an open source project that simplifies the authentication flow with Azure AD and actually other identity providers. BotAuth works with Facebook, it works with Twitter, works with all kinds of different identity providers. So if you want to build a bot that connects into other services, this is a great start with our bot framework. We have an implementation for both Node and .NET. Rob Howard looked at the .NET one a little bit. I'm going to talk about the Node one. They really operate the exact same way. So I'm going to show you kind of what happens. And this is a busy slide, but it's important to understand the flow and not just kind of go with what is provided by pulling down a package. So if you have a bot client and it's trying to request something that's secured by Azure Active Directory, first of all, what we're going to have to do is say, hey, we don't have a token for you. We don't have a true identity for you. So we're going to send back a message that says, here's a sign-in URL. Now, one of the really interesting things in that sign-in URL, if you were to dissect it and look at everything that's there, we pass a lot of contextual information encoded in the state parameter. So that's just a normal login.microsoft.com authorized, but there's all kinds of bot information. In fact, what we do is we actually serialize the bot state and actually pass it through this authorized URL. Because once you finish the sign-in process, we can pick things up exactly where you left off. So the user clicks on that, and it's going to take them to sign in. Now, sign in is typically going to go and talk to Azure Active Directory, but one of the beauties of Azure Active Directory is that if your organization federates, me as an app developer, I don't even have to know that. And so if you're use something like ADFS, it can automatically kind of fit into that process. And as an app developer, I don't need to even know that that happened. So regardless of if you use Azure Active Directory to sign in or some sort of federated sign in, the next step is it's going to say, you need to consent your application. Hopefully everyone's seen a screen like this where it says, hey, this third-party application, this bot, wants access to your profile, to post on your behalf, whatever. And so you get that consent screen. Once the user consents, Azure Active Directory is going to redirect them to the callback URL that you provided back in step 2. So when you provide that authorization code URL, it includes a callback parameter. So that's what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, go to this redirect. BotAuth is going to take that, get the authorization code that comes in it, and it's going to go and say, hey, I need to get an actual access token. I don't have an access token yet. Let me go get an actual access token. So it's going to handle that, getting that access token, and then it's going to respond to both the browser and in the chat to say, you need to respond with a magic number. I'm not going to go deep into the magic number, but a magic number is an additional layer of security, especially when you're chatting in a group chat. So someone can't take over your identity and be able to query on your behalf. So finally, once you enter in that magic number, you provide that back, the bot application now has tokens that it can use on your behalf, and it can go and send you data. So there's a lot of movement there, but it actually happens very effortlessly when you leverage one of these bot authentication packages. So let's just take a look here really quickly. So imagine this bot that we built that counts my SharePoint lists. Imagine that I want that also to run in Microsoft Teams. Now in Microsoft Teams, I can't do any of this script back channel stuff to try to get the user's identity. So I'm going to have to do some additional things to make that happen. So first off, let's go to our bot that we've created, which is right here. I'm going to go back to settings, or actually channels, and I'm going to turn on Microsoft Teams. Okay, I'm going to say done. So now that's turned on for Microsoft Teams. Now in my actual bot application, and the quick start already did this, is it pulled down a special package. If I go to package.js or JSON, you can see I have this bot auth package that I've pulled in. That bot auth is going to handle all the authentication for me. In fact, if I were to go look at my root dialog, here's what my root dialog does. Now, in Node, it uses a waterfall approach of here's a function, then run this function, then run this function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, do I already have a list count for this user? If so, and that's those SharePoint users, go ahead and just output it. So just as an example, if I go back here to the SharePoint web part and I say, hello, it already knows how many SharePoint lists I have, and it's just going to respond again to say, you have 39 lists. But if I don't have that, I'm going to go to this next step, which is go use that auth bot to get an access token. That's it. That's all I have to do is say, go get an access token. From there, it will pass that as a response. So I can just make sure that I got the response, which is my access token. So you can see here I'm setting up headers to call into the Microsoft Graph. And I'm just saying, go get me the root site and then all the lists that are in that root site. So I can actually debug this here. I'll put a breakpoint. I'll put a breakpoint here, zoom out, and let's go run this in Microsoft Teams. So I'm just going to click on the link. It's going to tell me it's going to open up Microsoft Teams. So here it is. I have a fresh chat. And we'll say, hello. And hopefully, if ngrok is still running, oh, I'm getting what's that? I did set a breakpoint. It didn't hit the breakpoint. Let me see. Oh, you know what? I know what it is, because I switched the bots on me. I switched the bots on you guys during that little break. So let me go out to my bots. We just need to do a different one. Hopefully I can find it. I think it's this delete. Yeah, we'll try this one. Now we'll just say hello. Hello. I got an accept, or we had a breakpoint. Invalid token. App's ID or password was invalid. All right, let's make sure I still have it in here. So I have it. Let me just verify that it's D46. D46, that's the right bot. Let me check one other thing, just for grins. I am setting it. Let me just do a rebuild one more time. And that is the right one. There we go. So I've been hitting a breakpoint. If I step over this, you're going to see it's going to say, hey, I don't have your list count, so I'm going to go next. And if I go back to my bot, there we go. It says you need to sign in, so I'll go ahead and click sign in. Now I need to sign in as Yina. So here's the consent screen. I'll go ahead and say accept. Now this should bring me back a magic number that now if I take this back to Teams and paste in my magic number, that's going to allow it to get access to my token. And so I can just check my response here. There's an access token. And if I finish playing, I don't do much, but I see that you have 4 lists in SharePoint. Now the benefit is this will be automatic if I message it again. If I say hello again, I'll hit my breakpoint, or I should hit my breakpoint, but it's not going to prompt me. You see that it automatically went there because it's storing the refresh token. It's doing all that for me. BotAuth handles 100% of that. So literally, for me to authenticate and start calling the graph, I added one line of code here, just in my waterfall, just saying go get access token. Now there's a place where I'm setting some of my settings, but essentially, very, very easy to implement, but you need to understand the flow of what's going on there in the case of you ever ran into an issue.
And just to go back to that team screen, the reason you're typing hello without the app mention is because you're talking directly to the bot for that demo as opposed to being the bot being part of a team, right?
That's right. I could sideload this into a team and use it within a team. So when you have a bot in a team, it's actually a member of the team, essentially. And so in this case, I was just doing a sideload for one-on-one.
So just to wrap up there, I think that the best guidance I can give based on the experience we've had, Hyperfish, but also talking to enterprise customers that were also building bots, is start off small. Like start with a really small business process, but don't replace the business process. What we've seen from customers that have tried to kind of totally just move people onto the bot is that you often get a lot of pushback as you're experimenting. And so guidance would be is that try and run it, do it as a pilot side by side with the current business process for a small amount of people. You might want to pick people that you know are a bit more technically competent, or maybe a selection, a bit of a mix of that. And then once you're happy with it running in parallel, then you can start doing the change management to push over onto just using the bot. Or maybe what you'll find is that some people like the bot and some people like the current experience with that business process. And that's something as a business you need to kind of accept that don't necessarily think that you can totally replace everything with bots for a certain group of users within your business. And that's something that we've seen when we've talked to people about this. And then from a readings perspective, just some recommended reading here, and something that I've done to keep up and learn is that there's a Flipboard magazine that I do where I add a lot of bot magazines. If you're using Flipboard at all on your devices, I'd encourage you to do that, because things that I find interesting around Enterprise Spot specifically, I'm always adding to that magazine. And then there is a very good, two very good websites there that kind of cover off and have very good authors that share, and most of them are kind of engineers in product companies and from enterprise organizations that share their stories of what's working for them and what isn't working for them from a technology perspective around bots. So definitely check out topbots.com and the chatbotsmagazine.com, which is on Medium. And then as Richard just demonstrated, the botauth on aka.ms/botauth is where you can get that library to allow you to handle that kind of handshake between the secret number to get Microsoft Teams to be able to call through to the auth to the Microsoft Graph. And then the demonstration there from the SharePoint bots is also available on GitHub as well. And that kind of gives you the end-to-end flow of getting the embedded chat working inside of the new SharePoint framework, inside of SharePoint Online in the online workbench. You can't use that personal local workbench because the authentication aspect, so definitely make sure you're using the online workbench when you launch that. And so with that, thank you very much. We are kind of at time. If anyone's got any questions, wants to run up to a mic now, they can, or they can come up to the front here and ask us offline. Thank you for getting up early and attending this session. Thank you.